there's a lot of people who think that if I get the vaccine, I'm completely protected from COVID-19. I'm not going to catch it. Could you explain to what efficacy means and what all goes into that?
Sure. We tend to have an all or none. Is it 100% I can't get infected and compare it to, well, there's no more smallpox. So I know the vaccine just shut it down and was 100% effective. But what we have to keep in mind is that what was the vaccine created to do? So very similar to the influenza vaccine. The vaccine was not created to put an invisible shield around your body and say that the virus will be repelled if you run into it. The virus still enters your body. Mm-hmm. What the vaccine was created to do and where its efficacious comes in is to prevent clinical illness. And by and large, what preventing clinical illness does is it accomplishes the two main goals, which were preservation of life and a return to societal function. Mm-hmm. And so return to societal function just means that we're able to move away from shelter in place and back to having normal lives where we can attend things. Mm-hmm. And we do that through a vaccination program. So as we look at efficacy, we hear with Delta variant that we're in the 90% for efficacy, and that's dropped into the 60s and 70s. But what we have to keep in mind is that how the vaccine is intended to work is to keep people out of the hospital and to keep people from dying.
Right.
And 97% of hospitalizations across the country are unvaccinated. And less than 1% of deaths have been vaccinated. So it's accomplishing the goal of, you may have a breakthrough infection, even though those are rare. You may have a breakthrough infection. You may have a sore throat. You may have a headache, but you're going to recover at home and you're going to avoid having to be in the hospital where unprotected, your immune system doesn't have that jump start. Mm-hmm. The novel virus enters and you don't recognize it until you're sick and then sick. Mm-hmm. And that's where we end up with hospitalization, and that's where we end up with an immune system becoming overridden to where we end up with death. So efficacy gets tied to prevention. Vaccines, they prevent clinical illness. They don't prevent the virus from coming into the body.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about the differences of efficacy between Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna? What their efficacy rates are right now.
So Pfizer and Moderna are the two mRNA technology vaccines. Their efficacy has continued to be extremely high in the 90% range. When we talk about Delta and say that that's dropped into the mid 60s, 70s, that is for efficacy in testing positive for an infection, but not in hospitalization. So the efficacy from a hospitalization and death is in the high 90s.
Okay. Johnson
& Johnson similarly started with a lower efficacy rate against the initial SARS-CoV-2 before we started getting into all the letters of the variants. And it was touted as one shot but lower efficacy in the high 70s%. But what, unfortunately, because that's noteworthy for the media to report this efficacy is less than efficacy. This efficacy for Pfizer, what got lost in that is that it was also in the high 90s for hospitalization and death.
Okay,
and it remains very high for hospitalization and death. So when we look at it, efficacy for preventing hospitalization and death is in the high 90s. Mm-hmm. Efficacy against breakthrough infection with the Delta variant has waned a little bit in the high 60s, 70s. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because breakthrough infections will occur. And as long as it's not leading to hospitalization and we're still practicing other health measures with masking and distancing, then we're not just having spreading virus continually.
Mm-hmm. This was a clip of the Good Samaritan Healthcast. If you want to hear more of what you just heard, just head on over to gshvin.org/healthcast.